We're going to shift gears here and go from Jesus as an adult, which we've been hearing about the last 3 or 4 weeks, back to Jesus as an infant. And today, what is really the last Sunday of the Christmas season. I know, right? Here we are on Groundhog Day, Super Bowl Sunday, and it's the last day of Christmas. We're still talking about Christmas, but it's true. You old-timers will know this season, this day as Candlemas. And it was the culmination of all the Sundays after Epiphany that were called Septuagesima and some other things like that. I can't remember the names, but it's still called Candlemas, but not by very many people. And so it's really the last day that you could leave your Christmas tree and your decorations up if you have a hard time letting go of all that. More officially today is the feast of the presentation of Jesus in the temple. Now, the reason we didn't read the gospel for that is that because observing it today was optional in some churches, according to the resource that Kim uses for the lectionary, and that she gets her bulletin readings for. And the resource I use that didn't make it optional, so I didn't even think to check with Kim to see if we were on the same page, because Kim's always right. And she's always got it wrong. And so for once, I wasn't wrong either. All this miscommunication gives me the opportunity, though, to tell this story of the presentation of Jesus, and tell it as my favorite commentator, Suzanne Guthrie, envisioned it, and as a short sacred opera in 4 voices. Now, somebody needs to compose this, and I was talking to Andy about maybe doing that, but he doesn't have time to compose, he said. So we need to talk to Edward Coverdale and see if he could do that maybe as his master thesis. But it would be a great opera. And just to give you a little background information before I go into it, it's now 40 days after Jesus' birth. And Jewish law requires that the mother the mother and father present the baby in the temple. And it's also the firstborn son of God, who is then ransomed to God, which is interesting language. We hear some of that in Paul as we're reading. When you read Paul, we hear about ransoming the ransom for many, for the people of God, and so the parents have to pay some money to the temple to ransom their child and receive the child back in their care. But it's still the firstborn male child is given to God, which is interesting, isn't it? Because this is God's son to start with, in Jesus' case. And so the idea that somehow that God is entrusting them in their care is even more powerful in this case. They also have to sacrifice a turtle dove and a lamb if they can afford it. But in their case, they sacrifice 2 turtle doves and or young pigeons. And so Suzanne Guthrie then imagines this opera beginning at this point. And she imagines this as though they were the staging. They're just off the stage in a busy courtyard where they are buying the 2 doves before entering the temple, and maybe someplace over here. And as they come up and they begin to come up to the steps, they enter a dark, echoing temple of beautifully proportioned pillars. It's not hard to imagine this as a temple. And arches, a template that so many Renaissance artists have rendered about the presentation. And Mary and Joseph enter alone into this vast space with the infant in a flimsy temporary cage for the turtle doves. And then from an unseen place in the darkness, you hear Simeon. Remember Simeon from a couple of verses before? Singing of his longing for the consolation of Israel. Simeon is old and weary, and it reminds God of the promise that God had made to him, that he would not see death before he had seen the Lord's Christ, the Messiah. Then a low light gradually illumines him as he sings of the exertion it took to come to the temple that day, of the uneven cobbled streets, the confusion of the marketplace, the impossible stairs as he came up, and his failing faculties. He waits now in utter darkness like the Gentiles in the holy but silent space, ready to die, but not yet fulfilled. Then from the opposite space in low-lit darkness, you can imagine over here, Anna, a contralto, sings her story of a long widowhood and a life of ecstatic love for God, fasting and praying night and day in the temple. After her story, Simeon's voice blends with hers, as they both summarize the states of their soul in this prescient moment. And then the next scene we see here, inspired by the Spirit, Simeon comes out of the darkness as he watches the young couple ascend the stairs and going up to the altar. Joseph, a tenor, is wary and protective as he sees this stranger coming out of the shadows, and shows Mary, though, that the staff that he's been carrying has suddenly blossomed into life with the holiness of the space. And then Mary is also brought into this as a soprano. She remarks about the blossoming staff, the sweet scent of the white flowers in the temple, like blossoms in the spring. And she remembers the day that they were brought together in the temple. And that's based on an old legend that Mary was raised in the temple, and that they knew only the holiest of men could be her spouse, and that a young Joseph, who had insisted that he never wanted to marry, suddenly the staff in his hand came to life and started growing again. And they knew that Joseph was the man destined to be her spouse. Anyway, their voices blend together in a duet as they acknowledge the mystery of their lives together. And then Simeon approaches with tears streaming down his withered face. "May I hold him?" he asks. And they pause, looking at this stranger, this old man who wants to hold their newborn child. And he says, and they finally assent to it. And as he holds the baby, and you can imagine this scene, as he holds the child, the words that we know now is the Nunc Dimittis, the song of Simeon from our evening prayer service. He begins to sing those words. "Lord, now lettest thou thy servant depart in peace, according to thy word. For these eyes of mine have seen this Savior, whom thou hast prepared for all the world to see, a light to enlighten the Gentiles and the glory of thy people Israel." And we hear those words of his finally being at peace. He can go now. He can die having seen the Messiah. And then he also then prophesies that this child is set for the rise and fall of many in Israel, and a sign that is spoken against, and that it will be opposed, so that the thoughts of many will be revealed. And he sings to Mary, "And a sword will pierce your own soul also, that thoughts of many may be revealed." Anna joins with with Simeon in singing that thoughts of many hearts may be revealed. Joseph joins, and then Mary, standing apart from the others, her voice, the steady, pulsing, foundational note that pulls all the voices together as she ponders all of this in her heart. Wouldn't that be a great opera? Isn't it a great story? And I don't remember it being told that much in the years that I've heard these words I know being told over and over. But what we're treated with in this vision is the faith of these people and how they've all come together for this moment of realization and this last manifestation of Christ. And so all of it is inspiring at that, but we can't just stop with that. We've got to always ask ourselves, but how is this event, this feast, going to make a difference in my life? And the first thing is the idea of radical freedom that we see in Simeon's life, that he is now at a place where he can let go. He can completely let go and go into the arms of God, knowing that all is complete in his life. What would it take for you to be able to say that about your own lives, that your life is complete? That's something to think about maybe later, to really think over. But what would it take for you to be aware and to know that you can go now, that all is ready, all is complete? So often I'm both beside somebody who is dying, who is ready to die, but there's one event that just needs to happen before they can go. Either a child needs to show up from a long journey. The family wedding is coming up in a week, and they have to hold on until then. It may be something bigger than that. Sometimes it's the reconciliation with someone that they need to have to feel at peace, to go in peace. What would it take for you to feel as if your life was complete? Making it to a certain age, reconciliation, like I said, or seeing jetpacks finally. That we're supposed to have them by now, right? Or the first person on Mars, who knows? Or world peace. We sang that, give to us peace in our time, O Lord. Wouldn't that be wonderful to see that? In our collect, we said the same thing. Let us see peace in our time. The second thing that we see in this wonderful story is that Simeon tells Mary and Joseph that this child will be the source of the falling and rising of many in Israel. And what I hear in this is that in Jesus's life and in his ministry, he points to the wisdom of God, and we heard some of this in the Beatitudes that we read in the Gospel. The idea that that the meek are the ones that will inherit the earth, that those who had been cast down will be raised up in God's economy. There will be a leveling of the playing field. Those who have been exalted by the world will be brought low. And we see this in our lives, and we need to accept that's the way God intended things to be. That the lowly and the meek are God's favorite children. And so the falling and rising of many. We also hear from Simeon that Jesus will be a sign that will be opposed, so that the inner thoughts of many will be revealed. Wow, that's a powerful idea. That Jesus will be opposed so that the inner thoughts of many will be revealed. It's almost as though that Jesus himself is the light that will shine on the people's dark thoughts and dark hearts and reveal what they're really thinking. It will reveal the motives of others and it will to expose the evil in our world in a lot of ways and lay it out there and so that everyone can see. And that Jesus is intentionally brings out what's truly in our hearts and souls. And so it gives us a good reason to want to work on who we are from the inside out. That we want to be something other than something that will be dark and not so well received by the world. And finally, he points out that to Mary that a sword will pierce your own soul too. This day of presentation, which should be one of the most joyful days of her heart, is also sort of overshadowed by some bitter sweetness. She's celebrating all that her Son will become, the salvation of humanity. But she also must hear that her soul will be pierced. She must accept that in addition to this huge honor that she's been given, it will come with a price. She'll pay the price of grief and tragedy and see her Son opposed by those he came to save. We too are called to pay a price for this wonderful gift that we've been given. Although we can't ever hope to repay God for this. But we're asked to give of ourselves then in response to it. We're asked to give through our faithfulness and our commitment and through our loving God enough that occasionally we might even sacrifice some of our time and our energy and our participation in God's kingdom on earth. We're having a lot of activity over here. We're called to surrender our wills and offer our lives to be transformed from the inside out, so that who we are will reflect, like Mary's life did, the words of the Magnificat, the song of Mary, "My soul magnifies the Lord." And so I want you to sit back right now, if you can, with all the distractions, and sit back, and if it helps, close your eyes. And I want you to imagine yourself in the temple, or maybe even at the altar of St. Luke's, but presenting yourself to God. I want you to present your hopes for the future of what you hope the world can become, what your children's lives and your grandchildren's lives and what all those you love will become. All of you. I want you to present all of you your innermost thoughts and motives, even the slimy, unpresentable ones, buried down deep in the basement. Your thoughts and motives and hopes and dreams. And yes, your grief and suffering. The things you don't like about our world. How hard life can be. And the ways we treat each other. But also your own stinginess about offering yourself to God. All the fears of doing that. Offer those as well. Present all of this at the altar in some way, maybe wrapped up as a gift or in a bucket, in my case a dump truck. And imagine standing around that altar receiving, as God is receiving all this, Simeon and Anna and Joseph and Mary and Jesus as your witnesses. And then, with a sense of peace in your heart, a sense of completion, a sense of all being well, depart in peace, trusting in faith that in God's kingdom you will be received in love with open, generous arms. Amen.